My own husband and mother conspired to make me a commodity. They just never imagined that I, a simple small-town girl, would be responsible for their downfall. Good afternoon, my dears. This is Grandma Andy speaking, with my well-lived 68 years, coming to you directly from my porch in Denver, Colorado. The sky is overcast today, but my heart feels light because I can share with you a story that's been buried deep in my soul for more than 4 decades. A story of betrayal and pain, but also of overcoming. Before I begin this difficult journey, I'd like to ask a small favor from my heart. Please subscribe to Grandma's channel, give this video a thumbs up, it costs nothing, and let me know in the comments which part of America you're watching from. This helps Grandma continue telling her stories and hopefully helps others who are going through difficult moments like I went through. Let's go back to 1973, when I was just 20 years old. Denver was already a big city, but the Highlands neighborhood where I lived still had a small-town feel. Everyone knew each other, children played in the streets, and gossip spread faster than rainwater down a hill. At that time, I lived with my parents in a simple but cozy house. My father, Mr. Anthony, was a hard-working man, a bus driver, respected by everyone in the neighborhood. My mother, Mrs. Irene, was a seamstress who made custom clothes for the wealthy ladies in the city. We had a modest life, but we never lacked anything, especially love and respect. My father was my hero, my safe harbor. When I was little, he would carry me on his shoulders through the Sunday farmers market, buy me cotton candy behind my mother's back, teach me to ride a bicycle. When I became a young lady, he was the one who scared away the bold boys, who gave me advice about life, who dried my tears when a friendship disappointed me. Little Andy, he would always say with that heavy accent from his Italian immigrant parents. In life, you meet many bad people disguised as good ones. Trust your instincts, they never deceive you. If I had followed that advice to the end, perhaps my story would have been different. But life has its plans, doesn't it? Everything began to change in the winter of 1972. It was a particularly cold December, the kind that makes your bones ache. My father started complaining of back pain, of fatigue that wouldn't go away. At first, we all thought it was just the weight of years of hard work. Driving a bus on those potholed roads wasn't easy. "It's just fatigue, daughter. It will pass soon," he would say, trying not to worry me. But it didn't pass. The pain increased, he lost weight, he started having difficulty urinating. After much insistence from me and my mother, he finally went to the doctor. I remember that day as if it were today. The cold office, the smell of alcohol, the doctor with thick glasses and a serious face. "Mr. Anthony, you have a tumor in your prostate. We need to do more tests, but from what I'm seeing, it's already quite advanced." It was as if the world had collapsed upon us. Cancer, in those days, was almost a death sentence, especially for someone who didn't have money for expensive treatments. My father, always so strong, so full of life, now faced an invisible enemy consuming him from within. The following months were a nightmare. Hospitals, tests, medicines that cost an arm and a leg. My mother worked double shifts at her sewing machine, and I dropped out of my teaching course to work as a cashier in a bakery. We did everything we could to get money for the treatment. But the cancer was stronger. In less than 6 months, my father could no longer get out of bed. That strong man, who carried cement bags on his back without complaining, now weighed less than a child. Morphine no longer relieved the pain, and his eyes, once so lively, now seemed distant, as if already seeing another world. On a rainy night in January 1973, he called me to his bedside. He held my hand with a strength I didn't know he still had. "Little Andy," he said, his voice almost a whisper, "take care of your mother. She's strong on the outside, but weak on the inside. And take care of yourself too. Never let anyone diminish you, ever." Those were his last words to me. In the early morning, as rain battered the roof, my father left this world. He was only 48 years old. The funeral was simple, but the cemetery was full. It seemed like half the neighborhood was there, paying their last respects to Mr. Anthony the bus driver. Drivers, conductors, neighbors, all with stories about how my father had helped them at some point, how he had been kind, honest, hard-working. I stood there, in the light rain, unable to cry. It was as if a part of me had been buried with him. The pain was so great that I couldn't even express it. The days that followed were foggy. I dragged myself to the bakery, served customers like a robot, returned home and found my mother sitting in my father's armchair, staring at nothing. The house, once so full of life and laughter, now seemed like a mausoleum. My mother changed after my father's death. It wasn't all at once. It was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. She, who had always been a strong, decisive woman, began to lean on me for everything. Any decision, any bill to pay, any problem with the house, everything fell on my 20-year-old shoulders. "You're just like your father," she would say. "Strong, decisive. I don't know how to live without him." At first I accepted this role. After all, I had promised my father I would take care of her. But I soon realized something wasn't right. She started going out more, coming home late, sometimes smelling of alcohol. She spent money we didn't have on new clothes, on expensive perfumes. When I questioned her, she cried, said she needed to feel alive again. "You don't understand, Andy. I lost the love of my life. I need to distract myself or I'll go crazy." It was during this troubled period that I met Alan. He appeared at the bakery one morning in April, asking for a pound of sourdough bread and 2 cream-filled donuts. Tall, dark-haired, green eyes that contrasted with his tanned skin, and a smile that lit up the room. He dressed well, dress pants, button-up shirt, polished shoes, which already made him stand out in our simple neighborhood. "You have the most beautiful smile I've ever seen," he said as I packaged the bread. I blushed immediately, awkward with the compliment. I wasn't used to receiving flirtations, especially from such elegant men. "Thank you," I muttered, embarrassed. "My name is Alan. I'm a lawyer. Just opened an office nearby. I'll become a regular customer if the bread is as good as the service." He came back the next day, and the next, and the next. Always during my shift, always with a discreet compliment, always buying something extra. Soon he was bringing flowers, to make the environment prettier, he said, but everyone in the bakery knew they were for me. On a Friday, after almost 2 weeks of this routine, he finally gathered his courage. "Andy, would you like to join me at the movies tomorrow? They're showing that new Paul Newman film." I hesitated. I hadn't gone out with anyone since my father's death. I didn't have the headspace, the time, or the desire. But there was something about Alan. Perhaps the gentleness, perhaps the respectful manner, perhaps just the fact that he was a welcome distraction, that made me accept. "Could be," I answered. "But I have to be home early. My mother—" Of course, he interrupted, smiling. "I'm a gentleman, Andy. It will just be a movie and perhaps a snack afterward. I promise you'll be home safe and sound before 10. And so it began. Our first date was exactly as he promised. A movie, a snack at the diner on the corner, and before 10, I was home. He didn't even try to kiss me, just a gentle kiss on the hand when saying goodbye. "It was a wonderful evening," he said. "I hope we can do it again." My mother was surprised when I told her I had gone out with someone. "A lawyer? And what does a lawyer want with a simple girl like you?" Her words hurt me, but not enough to stop me from continuing to see Alan. On the following weekends, we went out more times. Movies, the park, a walk by the Cherry Creek River. He was always gentle, attentive, interested in what I had to say. He made me feel special, important. On our 5th date, he kissed me for the first time. It was sweet, respectful, without pressure. When we separated, his green eyes shone with an intensity that left me breathless. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Andy," he confessed. I had been in love for a long time. How could I not be? Alan was everything any girl dreamed of, handsome, educated, hardworking, with a promising future. And most importantly, he treated me like a queen. Our relationship became official when he came to dinner at my house and asked my mother's permission. To my surprise, she was all dressed up, perfumed, smiling. Very different from the depressed woman I saw every day. "Of course you can date," she said, serving another slice of meat to Alan. "My daughter deserves a good man." My mother's approval was the icing on the cake. Finally, something good was happening in my life, after so much suffering. Alan seemed to be the answer to my prayers, the ray of sunshine after the storm. "You're my angel, Andy," he used to say. "You appeared in my life when I least expected and most needed it." In the months that followed, our romance blossomed. Alan would pick me up from the bakery, take me to places in Denver I had never been. He introduced me to his lawyer friends, took me to fancy restaurants where I felt out of place in my simple dresses. "Don't worry about that," he would say when I mentioned my discomfort. "Soon you'll get used to this life. After all, it will be the life we'll have together." The first time we made love was on my 21st birthday. He rented a cabin in Aspen, filled me with gifts, made me feel like the most special woman in the world. He was gentle, patient with my inexperience, concerned with my pleasure. "I love you, Andy," he whispered as he embraced me afterward. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you." 2 months later came the marriage proposal. It wasn't anything extravagant, just the two of us, sitting in the park where we used to walk. He took a small box from his pocket, got down on one knee, and asked the question every girl dreams of hearing. "Will you marry me? Be my wife, my companion, my best friend?" I accepted immediately, of course. How could I not? Alan was the Prince Charming who had appeared in my life when everything seemed lost. He was gentle, caring, successful. He loved me, respected me, wanted to build a future with me. When we told my mother about the engagement, her reaction surprised me. Instead of the joy I expected, she seemed concerned, hesitant. "Don't you think you're moving too fast?" she asked, her eyes fixed on Alan. "You've known each other for such a short time." "When you're sure, Mrs. Irene, you don't need to wait," he responded confidently. "I love your daughter and want to make her happy." My mother eventually gave in, of course. How could she oppose such a perfect son-in-law? We started planning a simple wedding for the end of that year. That's when Alan made the proposal that would change our lives forever. "Andy, I was thinking, why don't you and your mother sell this house and come live with me? My apartment is large, has 3 bedrooms. Your mother wouldn't need to be alone, and we'd save on her rent." The idea caught me by surprise. All living together even before the wedding? It wasn't what I had imagined for the beginning of our life together. But Alan had convincing arguments. "Think about it, love. Your mother is alone. You worry about her. This way, you can take care of her, and we already start our life together. It's practical and economical." When we presented the idea to my mother, she hesitated again. "I don't know, daughter. I don't want to get in the way at the beginning of your life together." "Not at all, mother-in-law," Alan intervened with his usual charm. "You'll never get in the way. On the contrary, you'll help us. Andy is still young, inexperienced. She'll need your advice to be a good housewife." That's how, 3 months before the wedding, we sold our little house in the Highlands and moved to Alan's apartment downtown. It was really spacious, well-furnished, with a beautiful view of the city. I felt like a princess leaving the cottage for the castle. The first weeks were a dream. Alan was the perfect fiancé, attentive, loving, always bringing small gifts, making me feel loved. My mother also seemed more animated, excited about the wedding preparations, making plans to decorate her new room. I should have noticed the first signs. The lingering looks Alan gave my mother when he thought I wasn't watching. The conversations that abruptly ceased when I entered the room. The way my mother seemed increasingly well-dressed, more perfumed, even without going out. But I was blind with love and gratitude. Blind for the chance to have a better life than I ever dreamed. Blind for the promise of happiness that Alan represented. Too blind to see that Prince Charming was, little by little, revealing his true face. And this face was darker than my worst nightmares could imagine. It didn't take long for the fairy tale to start fading like old clothes on the clothesline. It was about 2 weeks after the move that I noticed the first changes in Alan. Small things at first, so subtle that I doubted what I was seeing. The first thing I found strange was that he started coming home later from work. Before, when we were still dating, he made a point of being home at 6 o'clock sharp. Now, he rarely arrived before 8 or 9 at night. When questioned, he always had the same excuse ready on the tip of his tongue. "The office is booming, honey. Many new clients. It's a good sign. It means more money for our married life." I believed him, of course. Why wouldn't I? He was a lawyer. People needed lawyers all the time. And besides, Alan had never given me reason to distrust him. The second strange thing was the change in our intimacy. Previously so affectionate, so present, Now he always had an excuse not to touch me. I'm tired. I need to wake up early tomorrow. I have a headache. Justifications that sounded empty, but that I swallowed with a forced smile, saying I understood. It's normal, I consoled myself, talking alone in the bathroom mirror. Every couple goes through phases like this. But the most disturbing thing was when he started sleeping in the living room. It started with one night, then two. Soon it became routine. The excuse was always the same. I snore a lot, honey. You need to rest well to work at the bakery in the morning. In the living room I sleep on the couch and don't disturb anyone. That bothered me deeply. What fiancé sleeps separately from her fiancé because of snoring? But I swallowed that too, as I had already swallowed so many other things in life. After all, he was so good to me, so generous in welcoming my mother, such a hard worker. Who was I to complain about small details? Meanwhile, my mother seemed to be flourishing in that apartment. She, who after my father's death had become a sad shadow, now hummed around the house, did elaborate hairstyles, wore the prettiest clothes she sewed. I should have been happy with this change. But something about it all bothered me, without me knowing exactly what. Your mother is so excited about the wedding, Alan commented one night during dinner. I think she's happy to see you well on your way. That made sense at the time. What mother wouldn't be happy seeing her daughter about to marry a good man? I ignored that little voice in the back of my head that said there was something else happening right under my nose. It was on a Wednesday in September, just 2 months before our wedding, that the first piece of the puzzle fell into place. I had left the bakery early with a headache and returned to the apartment without telling anyone. The idea was to lie down a bit, have some tea, and feel better before Alan arrived from work. When I opened the door, I heard laughter coming from the kitchen. My mother's laughter, more youthful and light than I had heard in years. I approached silently, curious, when I heard a male voice that I immediately recognized. Alan. I froze in the hallway, not understanding. It was 2 p.m. What the hell was Alan doing at home at that hour? He should be at the office, working on those cases that kept him busy until late at night. She doesn't suspect a thing, I heard my mother say, her voice low but audible. Andy has always been too naive. Like her father, Alan replied, and they both burst into laughter. At that moment, I felt as if the ground had opened beneath my feet. I silently retreated to the door and left without being noticed, my heart beating so hard I thought I might faint right there in the hallway. I walked aimlessly through the streets of Denver, trying to process what I had just discovered. Alan was lying about working late. He and my mother were having conversations behind my back, laughing at me, calling me naive, and worse, comparing me to my father, as if that were something bad, something worthy of mockery. I returned home hours later, when it was already dark. I found them both in the living room, watching television as if nothing had happened. Where were you? Asked Alan, appearing concerned. I called the bakery and they said you had left early. I went for a walk, I replied dryly. I needed to clear my head. That night, lying alone in the bed I should be sharing with my future husband, I cried silently until I fell asleep. I still didn't know exactly what was happening, but my heart already knew it was something terrible. In the days that followed, I started paying more attention. The complicit glances between them, the way they always seemed to be whispering when I wasn't around, Alan's increasingly frequent excuses not to spend time with me. I have to sort out some details for the wedding, he would say, leaving the house on weekends. I'll help him, my mother would add, grabbing her purse and following him. They would return hours later, always with vague stories about having seen venues, tasted cakes, chosen invitations, but they never brought samples, never asked for my opinion. It was as if the wedding was happening between them, not between me and Alan. One night, while washing the dinner dishes, I heard a strange noise coming from my mother's room. Silently, I approached the half-open door and saw something I will never be able to erase from my memory. Alan, my fiancé, my future husband, in the arms of my own mother. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. A strange calm took over me as I returned to the kitchen and finished washing the dishes, as if nothing had happened. It was as if a part of me already knew, already expected this, like a terminal diagnosis that only confirms what the patient already felt in their body. The next day, I packed my things in a small suitcase, ready to leave that apartment and never look back. But as I was leaving, Alan intercepted me at the door. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, blocking my passage. "Away. It's over, Alan. I saw you two last night." I expected denial, perhaps anger or shame. What I didn't expect was the cynical smile that formed on his face. "So what? What are you going to do? Where will you go? You don't have a house anymore. You don't have money. You don't have anything or anyone." His words hit me like a slap. He was right. We had sold our house. The money from the sale had gone into a joint account that he controlled, supposedly for wedding expenses. I worked in a bakery earning a pittance. I had nowhere to go, no way to start over. "Stay," he said, in an almost conciliatory tone. "The wedding is still on. We need each other, Andy." "What do you mean, after what you did with my mother?" He laughed, a cold laugh that chilled my spine. "Your mother and I have an arrangement. She has her needs, I have mine. But I need a presentable wife, someone to take to events, to give respectability to my name. You're perfect for that." I was paralyzed, unable to process what I was hearing. Alan continued, approaching like a snake about to strike. "Think about it, Andy. A roof over your head, food on the table, nice clothes, a comfortable life. All you have to do is stay quiet and play the role of devoted wife in public. And in private? Will I have to pretend I don't know you're sleeping with my mother? In private, everyone goes their own way. I have mine, you can have yours, as long as you're discreet. Many marriages work like this. That wasn't a marriage. It was a commercial agreement, a transaction where I would sell my dignity in exchange for material comfort. But I was cornered, without options, without a way out. "I need to think," I finally managed to say. "Think," he replied, moving away from the door. "But don't take too long. The offer has an expiration date." That night, I locked myself in my room and cried until I had no more tears. I cried for the love I thought I had found, for the double betrayal I suffered, for the memory of my father that seemed increasingly distant, and I cried mainly for myself, for the naive girl who believed in a fairy tale and ended up in a horror story. The next morning, Alan left early for work, or at least that's what he said. My mother, who normally avoided being alone with me since I moved into the apartment, knocked on my bedroom door. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice so different from the loving mother I knew in childhood. I let her in, more out of curiosity than desire for reconciliation. She sat on the edge of the bed, her restless hands in her lap, avoiding my gaze. "Alan told me that you know," she began. "Know that you two are sleeping together behind my back?" "Yes, I know." She didn't deny it, didn't apologize. She just nodded, as if confirming a trivial fact, like the cloudy weather outside. "He offered you an arrangement." "Yes, a disgusting arrangement where I pretend to be his wife while you two continue doing what you do." My mother finally raised her eyes to me, and what I saw in them frightened me. There was no guilt, no remorse. There was only a cold, calculating determination. "Accept it, Andy. It's the best for all of us." "The best? How can living a lie be the best? You think your father and I lived the great love story? You think that sweaty bus driver was the man of my dreams?" Her words hit me like stabs. I always believed my parents had a happy marriage based on love and mutual respect. Hearing my mother talk like that about my father, especially after he had died in such a painful way, was unbearable. "Don't talk about him like that. He loved you. He took care of you until the end." "He was a good man," she admitted with a shrug. "But I deserved more, always deserved more. Alan can give us that, Andy. A life we never had, never would have any other way. At the cost of my dignity, of my father's memory? Dignity doesn't pay bills, daughter. Your father died and left us with nothing. We have to be practical." At that moment, looking at that woman I barely recognized, I understood that I had lost not only my father in the previous year, but also my mother. The woman before me was a stranger, someone for whom values like loyalty, honor, and family love meant nothing in the face of the prospect of material comfort. "I won't do this," I finally said, my voice firmer than I felt. "I won't live this farce." "Then where will you go? What will you do? Do you think with your bakery salary you can rent a place to live in this city?" She was right, and we both knew it. I was cornered, with no way out. "I have a week to decide," I replied, more to buy time than because I was actually considering the proposal. My mother nodded, apparently satisfied with the answer. Before leaving the room, she turned one last time. "Think with your head, not with your heart. The heart only serves to make us suffer." When the door closed, I felt a loneliness so deep that it physically hurt. In less than 2 years, I had lost my father to cancer, my fiancé to betrayal, and now my mother to a greed I couldn't comprehend. I was completely alone in a world that seemed determined to destroy me. But something in her words, something in the coldness with which she spoke of my father, lit a flame within me, a flame of anger, of indignation, of refusal to accept that situation as my final destiny. "I won't give up, Dad," I whispered to the emptiness of the room. "I won't let them win." That very afternoon, I pretended to accept the arrangement proposed by Alan. I smiled, said he was right, that it was best for everyone. I saw the relief in his eyes, the pride in thinking he had bent me, defeated me. "You won't regret it," he said, giving me a kiss on the forehead like someone rewarding an obedient dog. "We're going to have a great life together, in our own way." "Yes," I replied, smiling while inside my blood boiled. "In our own way." What Alan didn't know, what my mother didn't imagine, was that naive girl, that little Andy they judged so easy to manipulate, had died along with the last illusions about the love I thought I had found. In her place was being born a woman determined not only to survive, but to turn the tables against those who tried to destroy her. I needed a plan. I needed to be smart, patient, calculating. Everything I never was, everything they wouldn't expect from me. And most importantly, I needed concrete evidence of what was happening in that apartment, something that would give me bargaining power when the time came to act. During the following weeks, I maintained the role of the conforming fiancé. I smiled at the right moments, didn't question Alan's outings, pretended not to notice when he and my mother disappeared together for hours. I continued working at the bakery, saving every penny I could hide, preparing myself for the moment when I would need to flee. What I didn't know was that fate had even darker plans for me, plans that would transform my life into a nightmare much worse than I could imagine. But that would also give me, ironically, the weapons I needed for my revenge. So I ask from the bottom of my heart, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Knowing that my story might help someone already makes it all worthwhile. October 1973 arrived with an unseasonable cold in Denver. The nights were getting longer, and I was growing more anguished each day inside that apartment that had become my prison. The wedding was scheduled for December, less than 2 months away, and I still hadn't found a way out of that situation. Every penny I managed to hide from my bakery salary went into the escape fund I had created, kept in a cookie tin at the back of the closet. But the money accumulated slowly, insufficient to give me the freedom I so longed for. Alan and my mother were becoming increasingly brazen. They no longer worried so much about hiding their affair, knowing that I had accepted the arrangement. They exchanged caresses in front of me, whispered in corners, laughed at private jokes during dinner. Each moment was a small torture, a stab in my already so wounded heart. At that time, I worked from 5 in the morning to 1 in the afternoon at the bakery. I arrived home exhausted, but still had to do the household chores, cooking, cleaning, washing clothes. My mother, who had once been an exemplary housewife, now barely lifted a finger to help. She spent her days beautifying herself, going out shopping with Alan's money, living the life of luxury she had always dreamed of. "You should be grateful," she told me once, seeing my tired face as I prepared dinner after a full day at the bakery. "Alan gives us a life that your father could never give." I bit my tongue not to respond, not to say what I really thought of her. Each insult to my father's memory was a stab, but I swallowed the pain, focused on my escape plan. On a Friday, in late October, Alan came home earlier than usual. He was agitated, his eyes shining in that way I knew well, the shine that appeared when he had some scheme in mind. "We need to talk," he announced during dinner. "I have an important proposal to make." My mother smiled as if she already knew what it was about. I kept my face neutral, although an alarm sounded in my head. "The office isn't going as well as I expected," he began, surprising me. It was the first time he admitted any difficulty. I need money to invest, to expand the business, but the banks have very high interest rates. And what can we do? I asked, genuinely curious. He exchanged a look with my mother before continuing. I have a friend who pays very well for certain types of film. Film? What kind of film? My mother intervened, her voice strangely animated. Home movies, daughter. Family ones. I was confused for a moment. Home movies? Why would anyone pay for that? I don't understand. Alan cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. They're adult films, Andy. Films that show intimacies. The blood froze in my veins when I finally understood what he was proposing. You want to make a pornographic film? With me? He laughed, a nervous laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Not exactly. My friend pays especially well for more unusual films. Films that show relations between women of the same family. A heavy silence fell over the table as the implications of those words penetrated my mind. He wanted to film me and my mother together. It was disgusting, unthinkable, criminal. Have you gone crazy? I whispered, my voice trembling with anger and disgust. This is sick. It's just a film, he replied, his voice suddenly hard. And they pay very well, enough to solve all our financial problems. I won't do it. Never! I stood up from the table, ready to run to my room, but Alan grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. Sit down, he ordered, his green eyes now cold as ice. We haven't finished talking. I looked at my mother, expecting her to defend me, to show some trace of the woman who raised me with love and protection. Instead, she just looked away, playing with the food on her plate. You have no choice, Andy, Alan continued, still holding my wrist tightly. The house where you grew up was sold. The money is with me. You have nowhere to go, no way to support yourself alone. Either you do what I'm asking, or you go to the street. I prefer the street to this degradation, I shouted, trying to break free. He squeezed tighter, making me moan in pain. Don't be dramatic. It's just a film, 1 hour at most. No one you know will see it. And after that, we'll have enough money to live well, to fulfill all our dreams. What dreams, Alan? You said you loved me, that you wanted to build a family with me. Something darkened in his gaze, a shadow that made me instinctively back away. Love is a luxury for those who don't have bills to pay, Andy. In the real world, we do what needs to be done to survive. I finally managed to break free and ran to my room, locking the door. I leaned against it, my heart beating so hard it seemed about to jump out of my chest. They had gone completely insane. What Alan was proposing was criminal, immoral, repugnant. And my own mother seemed willing to participate. I stayed there for hours, sitting on the floor, my back against the door, thinking about all my options. I could flee that very night with the little money I had gathered. But where would I go? How would I survive? Winter was coming, the nights getting colder. Without a guaranteed job, without a roof, I could end up in an even worse situation. I thought about going to the police, reporting Alan for what he was proposing. But it would be my word against his, a respected lawyer against a simple bakery counter girl. And my mother certainly would take his side. Who would believe me? At some point in the early hours, exhausted from so much crying and thinking, I fell asleep right there on the floor. I woke up to insistent knocking on the door. Andy, open up. We need to talk. It was my mother's voice, not Alan's. I hesitated, but ended up opening the door. She entered quickly, closing it behind her. You need to do this, daughter, she said without preamble. We don't have another option. There's always another option, Mom, I replied, my voice hoarse from so much crying. How can you even consider such a thing? I'm your daughter, your own blood, she sighed, sitting on the edge of my bed. You don't understand how the world works, Andy. You think life is a fairy tale, that good always wins, that love solves everything. It's not like that. It never was. Dad didn't teach you that. He was a good, honest man. And he died leaving us in misery, she retorted, her voice bitter. Honesty doesn't fill the stomach, daughter. Alan can give us a life we never dreamed of having. At the cost of my dignity? Yours? What would Dad say if he saw this? Something flashed in her eyes. Guilt, perhaps, but soon disappeared. Your father is dead. We are alive and we need to survive. She stood up, smoothing the new dress that Alan had certainly bought. Think about it. The alternative is the street. When she left, I fell to my knees on the floor, sobbing. How had I reached this point? How had my life transformed into this nightmare in such a short time? A year ago, I was a beloved daughter, with a united family, dreaming of the future. Now I was trapped in an apartment with two people who planned to use me in the worst possible way. Dad, I whispered to the emptiness of the room. Help me. Give me strength. Show me a way. But no answer came. Just the oppressive silence of those walls that now seemed like a prison to me. That night, during dinner, Alan returned to the subject as if we were discussing something perfectly normal, like the color of the curtains or the menu for the week. So, Andy, have you thought about my proposal? I kept my eyes fixed on my plate, unable to look at him. I won't do it. He sighed, like a patient father with a stubborn child. Do you know how much they're offering? $50,000. It's a fortune. We could pay off all the office debts, maybe even buy a bigger house. $50,000. It was really a lot of money, more than I would earn in years working at the bakery. For an instant, I understood why my mother was tempted, but the moral price was too high. No, I repeated, my voice firmer. You can throw me out, leave me on the street, but I won't do it. Alan's face hardened, the mask of gentleness falling completely. It's a pity you think that way. Really a pity. His tone alarmed me. There was an implicit threat there, something I couldn't decipher at the moment, but that made all the hairs on my body stand on end. After dinner, I locked myself in my room again, determined not to come out until the next morning, when I would go to work. I started at 5, would leave the house at 4:30, when both would still be sleeping. On the way to the bakery, I would think of a better plan, maybe ask for help from my boss, Mrs. Clare, who had always been kind to me. At some point, I fell asleep, the emotional exhaustion finally overcoming my anguish. I woke up startled by a noise. The room was dark, only the weak light of the bedside lamp illuminating the outlines of the furniture. I sat up in bed, disoriented, not knowing what had woken me. That's when I noticed a shadow moving near the door. My heart raced. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It's me, daughter." It was my mother, but her voice was strange, slurred. I could discern her silhouette approaching the bed. The strong smell of alcohol reached my nostrils even before she sat on the edge of the mattress. "Mom? Is everything okay?" She laughed, a laugh I didn't recognize, bitter, cold, almost cruel. "Nothing is okay, Andy. Nothing ever was." Her hand touched my face, a touch that should be maternal, but that caused me a shiver of apprehension. "You look so much like your father," she continued, her voice increasingly slurred. "The same eyes, the same stubborn way. Mom, have you been drinking? You better go back to your room and—" I didn't finish the sentence. Her hand, which before caressed my face, moved down my neck, my shoulders, in a caress that had nothing maternal about it. I froze, unable to process what was happening. "Mom!" I finally exclaimed, moving away. "What are you doing?" It was then that I noticed another presence in the room, a male silhouette near the door, observing. "Alan." "What's happening?" I asked, panic growing in my voice. "The film, Andy," he replied calmly. "Since you didn't want to cooperate willingly, it will be by force." Only then did I notice what he was holding in his hands, a camera, one of those heavy old home movie cameras. A small red dot indicated it was already recording. "No!" I shouted, trying to get out of the bed, but my mother held me with surprising strength. "Stay still," she whispered, her alcohol-laden breath making me turn my face. "It will be easier if you don't resist." What followed was the worst nightmare anyone could imagine. My own mother, the woman who should protect me against everything and everyone, trying to force me to participate in that abomination while Alan filmed, giving instructions like a macabre director. I fought with all my strength. I screamed until my throat burned, but the apartment was large, the walls thick, the neighbors distant. No one would come to my rescue. At some point, my mother lost patience with my resistance. The first slap came as a shock, not for the pain, but for the realization that that woman, my own mother, was capable of physically assaulting me. "Stop this!" I shouted, tears streaming down my face. "You're my mother, and you're ungrateful," she replied, her eyes glazed by alcohol and something else I couldn't identify. "After everything I did for you." The second slap was stronger, leaving me dazed. Taking advantage of my moment of weakness, she tore off my nightgown with violence, exposing me to the camera Alan was holding. "Excellent," I heard his voice, distant as in a bad dream. "Continue like that." What followed was a session of physical and psychological torture. My mother, completely out of herself, hit me with a belt she had brought. Each blow left red marks on my skin, but the physical pain was almost a relief compared to the emotional agony of being abused by my own mother. Alan filmed everything, occasionally giving instructions, laughing when I screamed in pain, clearly excited by my suffering. At some point, I stopped fighting. My body was exhausted, my mind beginning to shut down as a defense mechanism. When it finally ended, I was thrown on the bed like a rag doll, red marks covering my body, blood running from a cut on my lip where the belt had hit me. My mother, apparently satisfied with her performance, staggered out of the room, leaving me alone with Alan. He approached the bed, the camera still on, capturing my final humiliation. "See?" he said, his voice low, almost gentle. "It didn't have to be like this. If you had cooperated, it would have been easier." I didn't respond. I had no strength or will. I just wanted him to leave me alone with my pain and shame. "This film will earn us a lot of money," he continued, apparently interpreting my silence as acceptance. "My friend said there's a specific market for this type of content, incest, violence. There are people who pay fortunes." The word incest penetrated the fog of pain that enveloped my mind. Was that what they had done to me? Was that what they would call the abuse I suffered? "Rest," he said, finally turning off the camera. "Tomorrow, you don't need to go to work. Say you're sick." When the door closed behind him, I remained motionless on the bed, looking at the ceiling, the tears drying on my face. Something had broken inside me that night, not just my trust in people, my faith in family love, something deeper, more essential. But while lying there, hearing the muffled laughter coming from the living room where my mother and Alan were probably celebrating their macabre feat, a new emotion began to take the place of pain and shame. An emotion I had never felt with such intensity. Hatred. A pure, crystalline hatred that cleared my mind like lightning on a dark night. They had stolen everything from me, my dignity, my innocence, my trust in the world. But I wouldn't let them steal my future. I wouldn't let them go unpunished after what they did. Slowly, ignoring the pain that ran through every inch of my body, I got up from the bed. I dragged myself to the bathroom in my room, where I took a hot shower, letting the water wash away the physical marks of that night, knowing that the emotional scars would remain forever. Then, lying back in bed, I began to formulate a plan. Not an escape plan like before. A revenge plan. A revenge that would be so complete, so devastating, that Alan and my mother would bitterly regret the day they decided to make me their victim. That night in October 1973 marked the end of the naive girl I once was. In her place was born a woman determined to seek justice with her own hands, no matter the price she had to pay. The sun hadn't risen yet when I opened my eyes the next morning. My entire body ached, every movement a brutal reminder of the previous night. I got up slowly, trying not to make noise. The apartment was silent. Alan and my mother were probably still sleeping, exhausted after the drinking and violence they had inflicted on me. I took the small hand mirror and examined the damage. My lip was cut and swollen. Red marks, some already purple, covered my arms, back, and legs. I had a cut on my eyebrow that I didn't remember how it happened. But the worst were the eyes. My eyes were different, as if something fundamental had been altered in them forever. "Today it ends," I whispered to my reflection. One way or another, I dressed carefully, putting on a long-sleeved blouse to hide the marks on my arms. In the kitchen, I prepared coffee as if it were a normal day, trying to make as little noise as possible. While the water boiled, my mind worked on the plan I had elaborated during the sleepless night. The first step was to find the camera. Alan had certainly stored it somewhere, probably locked up so I wouldn't have access. But he underestimated my determination. I finished preparing the coffee and returned silently to the hallway, stopping in front of the door to the room they shared. I pressed my ear against the wood and heard light snoring. They were still sound asleep. Alan's office was at the end of the hall. He always kept it locked, but I knew where the spare key was kept, in the potted plant in the living room, buried superficially in the soil. How many times had I seen him hiding it there, thinking I didn't notice? With my heart beating fast, I took the key and opened the office door. The room was in half light, curtains closed blocking the little dawn light. I closed the door behind me and turned on the small lamp on the desk. Where would he keep the camera? My eyes methodically scanned the room. The bookshelf of law books? The desk full of papers? The file cabinet? I decided to start with the most obvious place. The desk drawers. The first contained only office supplies. The second, various documents. The third was locked. Bingo, I thought, feeling a chill in my stomach. I looked around, searching for something I could use to open the drawer. I found a metal letter opener on the desk surface. Carefully, I inserted it into the lock and manipulated it until I heard a soft click. The drawer slid open, revealing its contents. There was the camera, along with several used tapes, labeled with dates and names I prefer not to recall. Apparently, I wasn't their first victim. I picked up the camera with trembling hands, checking if it still had the tape from the previous night. It was there, the evidence of all the brutality I suffered, recorded forever on film. But it wasn't just the camera that interested me. I continued searching the drawer and found a folder with documents. When I opened it, my heart almost stopped. They were papers from the sale of our house, deposit receipts, bank statements. All the money that was supposedly being saved for the wedding had been diverted to an account in Alan's name only. I took the camera and the most important documents, storing them in the bag I had brought with me. I closed the drawer and replaced the letter opener exactly where it was. I left the office, locked the door, and returned the key to the potted plant. The second step of my plan was riskier. I needed to leave the apartment without being noticed and reach the nearest police station. The problem was that I wasn't sure if I could return before they woke up. If they noticed my absence and noticed the camera was missing, I would be in great danger. I decided to risk it. I took my coat, the bag with the evidence, and left the apartment silently. The living room clock marked 5:15 in the morning. The streets of Denver were still deserted, the cold, late October air cutting my face. I walked hurriedly, ignoring the pain I still felt throughout my body. The nearest police station was about 15 blocks away. I could take a bus, but at that hour they were rare and I couldn't waste time waiting. As I walked, I mentally rehearsed what I would say. How would I explain the unimaginable? How would I put into words the horror I lived? And what if they didn't believe me? If they thought it was my invention, a form of revenge against my mother and my fiancé? When I finally arrived at the police station, I was breathless and sweaty, despite the cold. The officer on duty, a middle-aged man with deep eye bags, looked at me with suspicion. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I took a deep breath, gathering all my courage. "I need to report a crime, an abuse against me." He indicated a chair and called another officer, a younger one. I told my story in the clearest and most direct way I could, without omitting details, no matter how painful they were. Their faces went from initial distrust to shock, then to contained anger. "And do you have evidence of this?" asked the older one when I finished my account. I opened my bag and took out the camera. "It's all here. They filmed everything." The younger officer took the camera carefully, as if it were something that could contaminate him. "We'll need to see this." "I know," I replied, my voice breaking, "but I don't want to be present when you watch it." They agreed and took me to a separate room where a female officer was called to formally register my complaint and photograph my injuries. Meanwhile, the two officers went to watch the tape in the adjacent room. 20 minutes later, the older officer returned, his face pale, his eyes hard as stones. "Ma'am," he said, his voice controlled, "we're going to arrest these people immediately. Would you like to accompany us or prefer to stay here at the station?" A part of me wanted to see their faces when the police arrived. I wanted to witness the moment when they would realize their game was over. But another part, more sensible, knew it would be too traumatic. I prefer to stay here, I replied. I understand. We're going to send a patrol car right now. Is there anyone else in the apartment besides the two of them? No, just them. Good. Don't worry, ma'am. They won't hurt anyone anymore. I sat in a hard chair at the police station, drinking the weak coffee the policewoman offered me, waiting for news. Time seemed to drag. Each minute lasted an eternity. I imagined 1,000 scenarios, them fleeing before the police arrived, resisting arrest, denying everything. After what seemed like an eternity, I heard the noise of cars braking sharply outside. Raised voices, doors slamming. I instinctively stood up, moving to the window. I saw when they brought my mother and Alan out of the police car. Both handcuffed, she crying uncontrollably. He with an impassive face, as if none of that were real. I didn't feel what I expected to feel. Neither joy, nor relief, nor satisfaction. Just an immense emptiness, as if a part of me had died that night and would never return. The older officer came to me. We found more tapes in the apartment. Many tapes. It seems they had been doing this for some time, with other victims. Your fiancé confessed that he sold this material. Your mother is claiming she was coerced, that she was under the influence of alcohol and drugs. I wasn't surprised. It was typical of her to escape responsibility for her own actions. What happens now? I asked, suddenly exhausted. They will remain in jail. The case is serious. There's no bail. Do you have somewhere to go? Any relative? Friend? I shook my head negatively. I had no one. All my family was there. One arrested for having assaulted me, the other for having filmed and encouraged it. There are shelters for women victims of violence, he suggested, with unusual gentleness for a man of that time. I can call social services. That won't be necessary, I replied, an idea forming in my mind. There's a person who might be able to help me. I left the police station feeling strangely light, as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The sun was already high in the sky. People circulated in the streets, oblivious to the drama I had lived in the last few hours. I took a bus to the bakery where I worked. Mrs. Claire, my boss, widened her eyes when she saw me enter. The cut lip, the black eye, the way I moved with difficulty. My God, girl, what happened to you? Between tears and sobs, I told everything. I didn't omit anything, didn't soften the most sordid details. She listened in silence, the horror growing on her kind face. When I finished, she hugged me tightly, ignoring the customers waiting to be served. Stay here, Andy. I have a small room in the back where you can stay until you get settled. No one will hurt you again. I promise. That unexpected kindness, coming from someone who wasn't even a relative, made me cry again. But this time, they were tears of relief, of gratitude, perhaps even of hope. In the days that followed, the news spread quickly. Lawyer and mother-in-law arrested for abusing young woman, headlined the local newspaper. My name wasn't mentioned, thank God, but the story was clear enough for those who knew the people involved. The trial was quick by the standards of the time. The evidence was irrefutable. The tapes, my injuries, the testimonies of other victims who were identified and had the courage to speak out. Alan and my mother were sentenced to several years in prison. I never went to visit them. For me, both were dead. The money from the sale of our house was judicially recovered and returned to me. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to restart my life. I continued working at Mrs. Claire's bakery for a few more months, living in the small back room, saving every penny. In mid-1974, I made a drastic decision. I needed to leave Denver. There were too many memories there, too many people who knew my story, too many pitying looks that followed me through the streets. I wanted a place where no one knew me, where I could be just Andy, not the girl from that terrible case. Aspen, in the Colorado mountains, seemed the perfect place. Small, touristy, with job opportunities, and far enough from Denver to give me a new start. Using the money I had saved, I rented a small apartment near the center and started looking for work. That's how I ended up as a waitress at the Alpine Chalet, a traditional restaurant that served fondue and other typical dishes to tourists. The work was hard, especially on weekends and vacation seasons, but it paid reasonably well and the tips complemented my income. Slowly, I rebuilt my life. I made friendships, learned to trust again, not completely, never completely, and even started to smile once in a while. The memories of the night of terror never completely disappeared, but they became more distant, like a nightmare that loses strength with the passing of time. It was at the Alpine Chalet that I met Matthew in July 1976. He was from Chicago, a lawyer like Alan, but as different from him as day is from night. He was spending vacation in Aspen and came to dine at the restaurant 3 nights in a row, always sitting in my section. On the 3rd night, he gathered courage and invited me for a coffee after my shift. I politely refused. The last thing I wanted was to get involved with another man, especially another lawyer. He didn't insist, respected my decision. But he came back the next night and the next, always gentle, always respectful. Gradually, his gentle persistence broke down my barriers. Just a coffee, I finally agreed, after almost 2 weeks. Nothing more. The coffee transformed into a walk by the lake, the walk into a movie, the movie into dinners. When his vacation ended, I thought I would never see him again. To my surprise, he came back the following weekend, and the next, and the next. "It's almost 6 hours of driving from Chicago to here," I commented, genuinely perplexed by his dedication. "For you, I would drive much more," he replied, with that honest simplicity that was his trademark. It took me a long time to tell him about my past. I was afraid of his reaction, afraid of seeing disgust, pity, or disbelief in his eyes. When I finally gathered courage, almost a year after we met, his response surprised me. "Thank you for trusting me enough to share this," he said, holding my hands firmly. "I can't change what happened. I can't erase this pain. But I promise that, as long as I live, I will do everything so that you never feel vulnerable again. Never be afraid again." I married Matthew in December 1977 in a simple ceremony in the small church in Aspen. Mrs. Claire came from Denver to be my maid of honor. I had no other guests on my side. All my family was dead to me, literally or figuratively. We moved to Chicago, where Matthew had his law firm. Adapting to the big city was difficult at first, but he was patient, giving me time and space to get used to it. He never pressured me to work outside the home, although I eventually chose to do so, opening a small confectionery inspired by the sweets I learned to make in Aspen. Our first son, Anthony, born in 1979, was named after my father. 3 more followed: Paul, Rebecca, and Luke. I raised my children with the love and protection I didn't receive in the final phase of my childhood. I never raised a hand to them, never used harsh words, never made them feel less than the extraordinary people they are. Matthew was the companion I never dreamed I could have, patient in the moments when the nightmares returned, understanding when certain triggers made me retreat into myself, firm when I needed strength to continue. Our marriage wasn't perfect. What marriage is? But it was built on solid foundations of respect, honesty, and genuine love. I never had contact with my mother or Alan again. I found out, by chance, that she died in prison in 1983 of pneumonia. I felt nothing, neither anger, nor sadness, nor relief. It was like hearing about the death of a stranger. As for Alan, I don't even know if he's still alive. It doesn't matter. He no longer has power over me, over my life, over my ability to be happy. The scar from that October night never completely disappeared. There are moments, even now, so many decades later, when a smell, a sound, an image briefly transports me back to that dark room. But I've learned to live with these memories without letting them define who I am. I am Andy. I am a wife, mother, grandmother. I am a survivor. And each day that I wake up next to the man who taught me to trust again, with each smile from my children and grandchildren, with each small joy of everyday life, I win again over that terrible night. The sweetest revenge wasn't seeing my aggressors behind bars. It was building a full, happy, and meaningful life despite what they tried to take from me. It was proving, mainly to myself, that evil can leave scars, but it doesn't need to poison the future. And that, my dears, is the greatest victory anyone can achieve. Time is the master of all things, my dears. It heals, transforms, softens the roughest edges of our pain. Of course, Some wounds are so deep that they never completely heal. We just learn to live with them, like old companions on our journey. Chicago embraced me like a mother I never truly had. The big, noisy, chaotic city became my refuge, my fresh start. No one there knew my past. No one looked at me with that mixture of pity and morbid curiosity that bothered me so much in Denver. I was just Andy, the wife of Dr. Matthew, later the mother of Anthony, Paul, Rebecca, and Luke. In the first years, I confess that I lived in a constant state of alert. Every man in a suit who vaguely resembled Alan made me freeze in the middle of the street. Every news about criminals getting out of jail kept me awake at night, imagining if he would come after me. Matthew noticed this fear without me needing to verbalize it, and made a point of periodically checking Alan's legal status, assuring me that he remained in prison, far from us. "He will never hurt you again," Matthew would repeat whenever I woke up screaming after a nightmare. "I'm here. I'll always be here." And he really was. Always by my side in the appointments with the psychologist that I finally started seeing in 1980, after the nightmares became so intense that they affected my ability to care for little Anthony. Always supporting me when I decided to open my confectionery, even if it meant less time at home. Always respecting my limits in intimacy, understanding that there were days when I simply couldn't bear to be touched, even by him. Therapy was a watershed in my life. Dr. Helen, a middle-aged lady with gentle eyes and a firm voice, helped me process the trauma in a way I never imagined possible. "What happened to you was terrible, Andy," she told me in the first session. "But it's not who you are. It's something that happened to you, not something that defines you." It took me years to really internalize these words, to separate Andy from the traumatic event, to understand that I wasn't the girl who was abused by her mother and fiancé, but rather Andy, woman, wife, mother, confectioner, complete person with dreams, desires, talents, and flaws like anyone else. The Sweet Beginnings confectionery opened its doors in 1983 in a small rented space in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. I started modestly, just me and an assistant, making cakes and fine desserts for parties. At first, my clients were mainly Matthew's friends and their wives, who ordered out of kindness or curiosity. But soon the quality of my work began to speak for itself, and the business grew organically. Working with sweets had something therapeutic for me. The precision of the recipes, the concentration required, the transformation of simple ingredients into beautiful and delicious creations. All this anchored me in the present, prevented me from getting lost in memories of the past. And of course, there was the genuine joy on people's faces when tasting my sweets, especially children. "There's no sadness that can resist a good chocolate truffle," I used to say, and I truly believed it. In 1985, when Luke, my youngest, was born, the confectionery had already expanded to a larger space and had 5 employees. Balancing motherhood of 4 children with a growing business wasn't easy, but Matthew was always a present father, something rare for that time. "We are partners," he would say. "Your struggle is my struggle. Your joy is my joy." It was in that same year that I received a letter that would once again change the course of my life. The envelope had the stamp of the penitentiary system, and my first instinct was to throw it away without opening it. But something made me hesitate, and I ended up reading its contents. It was an official notification. Alan had died in prison, victim of a heart attack. I didn't feel joy nor satisfied revenge, not even immediate relief. What I felt was more like the closing of a chapter, the conclusion of a story that no longer had power over me. I showed the letter to Matthew and to Dr. Helen in my next therapy session. "What do you want to do with this information?" asked Dr. Helen, always direct. "Nothing," I replied after thinking for a moment. He hasn't had a place in my life for a long time, and it was true. At some point, between raising my children, developing my business, and building a full life with Matthew, Alan had become just a distant ghost, without substance, without power. The 1990s arrived, bringing changes to our family. Anthony, my firstborn, entered law school, following in his father's footsteps. Paul chose engineering, Rebecca medicine, and Luke, always the artist of the family, opted for architecture. Seeing them growing strong, secure, seeking their own paths was my greatest joy and also my greatest victory over the past. "You raised wonderful children," commented my mother-in-law, Mrs. Constance, during Anthony's graduation party in 1997. "We raised them," I corrected, looking affectionately at Matthew. "Each of their achievements has a bit of both of us." The confectionery, which started so small, transformed into a network with 3 units spread across Chicago. I never wanted to expand too much, preferring to maintain the quality control and personal touch that had always been our trademark. I still personally tested each new recipe, still made a point of knowing each employee by name, still got emotional when customers returned to say that our sweets had made their special moments even more memorable. In 2000, at 48 years old, I became a grandmother for the first time. Maria, daughter of Anthony and his wife Carla, was born on a sunny April morning. Holding that little 5-pound package in my arms, feeling her baby smell, seeing in her curious little eyes the future unfolding, was an indescribable emotion. "Grandma," I whispered, testing the title aloud for the first time. Grandma Andy. How different it sounded from the Grandma Irene that my mother never got to be. How it carried another weight, another meaning, another promise. I promised myself at that moment that I would be for Maria, and for all the grandchildren who would come later, the opposite of what my mother was for me. I would be a safe harbor, not a threat. I would be unconditional love, not manipulation. I would be protection, not danger. In the years that followed, our family continued to grow. More grandchildren arrived. John, Beatrice, Lucas, Sophie, Peter, and Gus, each bringing their own light, their own flavor to our life. Matthew and I delighted in spoiling them, in seeing them grow, in participating in their lives in a way that our jobs hadn't always allowed with our own children. In 2010, at 58 years old, I decided to gradually step away from the daily administration of the confectionery. Rebecca, who had surprised everyone by abandoning medicine in her 3rd year to study culinary arts, took the reins of the business with competence and passion. "I learned from the best," she would say, filling me with pride. Matthew also began to reduce his workload at the law firm, passing more cases to Anthony, who had become his partner. We started traveling more, visiting places we had always dreamed of seeing: Paris, Rome, Lisbon, New York. Each trip was an adventure, a celebration of the freedom we had conquered, of the life we had built together. It was during our trip to Portugal in 2012 that Matthew had the first warning. A sudden malaise during a walk in Sintra, a tightness in his chest that he tried to hide, but that immediately alarmed me. We returned hastily to the United States, straight to a battery of tests. The diagnosis came like a punch to the stomach: advanced coronary artery disease. He would need bypass surgery as soon as possible. "Don't worry," he tried to calm me, seeing the terror in my eyes. "We've faced worse things together. The surgery was a success, thank God. But the recovery was long and difficult. For the first time in our marriage, the roles were completely reversed. Now I was the one who needed to be the rock, the safe harbor, the unshakable strength. I cared for him with all the love and dedication he had always given me. I learned about medications, special diets, recommended exercises. I transformed our house to facilitate his recovery. I was by his side at each consultation, each test, each small victory on the path to rehabilitation. "You're my guardian angel," he would say, holding my hand during physical therapy sessions. "I'm just returning the favor," I would respond, knowing that I could never completely repay everything he had done for me. Matthew recovered, but he was never the same. He became more fragile, more contemplative, more aware of the finitude of life. We decided it was time to enjoy every moment we had together to the fullest. We sold our large house in Lincoln Park, where we had raised our children, and bought a smaller apartment, easier to maintain. We began to divide our time between Chicago and a small farmhouse in Wisconsin, where we planted our own vegetables and fruits, received the grandchildren on weekends, and watched breathtaking sunsets. In 2017, we celebrated our ruby wedding anniversary, 40 years of marriage. The party, organized by our children, brought together family, friends, former employees, people who had crossed our path over the decades. It was a celebration not only of our love, but of the life we had built together, of the obstacles we had overcome, of the family we had created. If I could go back in time, Matthew told me during our dance. "I would marry you 1,000 times again." Looking at him, at the wrinkles that framed his gentle eyes, at the now completely white hair, at the smile that still made my heart race, I knew I would say the same. Despite everything, despite the traumatic beginning of my adult life, I ended up being luckier in love than I ever imagined I deserved. It was in 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, that I lost Matthew. Not to the virus that haunted the world, but to a second heart attack, fatal this time. We were at the farmhouse planting strawberries that he would never see grow when he simply fell by my side, without warning, without a chance to say goodbye. The pain of loss was overwhelming, different from any other I had ever experienced. It wasn't the sharp pain of betrayal, nor the horror of abuse, nor the emptiness of rejection. It was an amputation pain, as if half of me had been suddenly torn away, leaving a space that nothing would ever fill. The isolation of the pandemic made mourning even more difficult. I couldn't have the funeral that Matthew deserved, couldn't be embraced by all who loved him, couldn't feel the comfort of the physical presence of my extended family. Just a small, hurried funeral, with masks hiding the tears, social distancing preventing the comfort of touch. But even in the deepest pain, even in the most acute absence, I found strength in the life we had built together. In the children we raised, in the grandchildren we adored, in the legacy of love and respect that Matthew left behind. Today, at 68 years old, I look back and see a life that, despite its traumatic beginning, was rich in love, purpose, and meaning. The frightened girl from Denver transformed into a strong woman, a beloved wife, a dedicated mother and grandmother, a successful businesswoman. The pain of the past never completely disappeared. Some wounds are too deep to fully heal. But I learned to carry this pain without letting it define me, without allowing it to darken the many joys that life has given me. If there's one lesson I'd like to leave with you, my dear viewers, it's this: no matter how dark the night seems, the sun always rises again. No matter how deep the wound, healing is possible. No matter how devastating the betrayal, true love still exists in the world. Each of you has your own story, your own pains, your own challenges. Perhaps some of you are going through moments as difficult as those I faced. Perhaps you feel there's no way out, that the darkness is permanent. But believe this grandma who has seen everything in this life. There is always a path forward, always a possibility of starting over, always a chance to build something beautiful from the ruins. Before ending this video, I'd like to ask a small favor from my heart. If my story touched you in any way, if it brought some comfort, some hope, click the like button and subscribe to the channel. This helps greatly to bring this message to more people who might need to hear that they are not alone in their struggles. As my Matthew used to say, life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. And my dears, despite all the storms, I learned to dance. You can too. A loving embrace from this grandma who was rooting for each one of you. Until the next video, God willing.